Good evening and a very warm welcome. You're watching The Watchdog. I'm Peter Ndora, standing in for Vuyomvoko today. He'll be away today and tomorrow. Well, today, President Cyril Ramaphosa wrapped up his testimony before the State Capture Commission. On Wednesday, he testified as the Deputy President of the country, and today he was testifying as the President of the country. A very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday edition of The Watchdog. Now, for the first time since the cabinet reshuffle last week, President Ramaphosa detailed reasons behind his decision to put the State Security Agency under his control. And to help us unpack a lot of these testimonies that came through today and the things that he said, I'm joined by analysts Levi Ndo, Dr. Theo Fenter and Sanusha Naidu, to my panel of experts. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Hello.
All right, let's begin with how President Ramaphosa wrapped up his testimony over the 2 days. And these were his final words.
I must say, I take full responsibility for the choices that I made myself and the actions that I took. I will not run away from those decisions. I have also sought to outline some of the measures this administration has taken to end state capture. I articulated quite a number of those in my opening statement and have reiterated here that we are taking corrective measures to obliterate state capture and that it will take time, but we are going to stay the course. It was not an easy decision for a sitting head of state to come and subject themselves to questioning in the commission. Even my fellow heads of state in the region questioned me and said, why would you do such a thing? A head of state going to be questioned? And I said, something really wrong happened in our country. And to put it right, I've got to go as the head of state. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So that was President Cyril Ramaphosa testifying for a second day at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. Now, this program, The Watchdog, is all about bringing our leaders and our institutions to account. So let's do that, and let's start with our panelists. And I want to start with Sanusha. For some reason, I've just drawn to you, and this is a question for all of you. And I want us to unpack the performance of the president, because the citizens were watching and they were owed answers, they were owed explanations. He says he takes full responsibility. Do you think that he served the nation well over the past 2 days, Sanusha?
Good evening, Peter and Theo and Levi. I think the challenge right now is it was 2 days in the last 2 days, and it was 2 days previously. So in all, it was 4 days that we have to assess this performance against. And more importantly, did he actually provide the kind of tapestry and a roadmap that we are wanting him to provide in terms of the answers, the intricate details around some of the questions, but more importantly, I think whether or not, in his capacity, both as the deputy president of the party and the deputy president of the republic, during his time in those positions, was he aware of what was happening when it came to state capture? And I think the last 2 days kind of got us to a point where at times, and I'll say personally, and I'm not going to speak for the rest of the nation or the citizens, but personally, I think there was senses of frustration where just to get to say, did you know or did you not know, the what and the where and the when? I think also there were questions that began to come out around the challenges, how challenging the positions were and how kind of disconcerting at times it is to be a member of the ANC and deal with all of these intricacies and these different battle lines and so forth in terms of the relationship between party and state. Thirdly, I think the question also remains to what extent has he, in his official capacity and official kind of knowledge of information versus the unofficial knowledge of information. Because I think at the end of the day, what we really wanted to understand was to what extent did President Ramaphosa, in his capacity and choosing option number 5, decide that it was the best route to go? And then, of course, how did you try to effect that reform? And I think in his closing remarks, when he says he takes full responsibility for the actions that he's chosen, I think that's very important. I think we also got to remember it's an unprecedented moment as well in the context of everything that is South African as we live and breathe this democracy and ventilate it. Because at the end of the day, it's unprecedented that we have a president, a sitting president, that avails himself to the commission, as he mentioned in his closing remarks when he kind of had this conversation with other regional and continental leaders. But at the same time, I think there are still unanswered questions. And I think the real challenge is the commission closed today. It's the end. The report and the recommendations are going to be written and it's going to be handed over to him. And I think for a moment there were intimations about how much more he needs to do in going forward and becoming decisive in the actions he takes. A lot was said about the State Security Agency and the whole issue around that agency and how that agency became almost
and
this black spot.
We'll discuss that quite a little bit later on. But let me come to you, Levi. I'm a citizen. I watched my president for the last 2 days. Should I be happy? Should I be pleased with what he said?
Good evening, Peter. Good evening to my fellow panelists and the viewers at home. Peter, I think this was a moment which was quite crucial for both South Africa, for the president, and all of us. What I've actually picked up in the testimony by the president is that he has actually acknowledged that wrong things took place in South Africa in the form of state capture. He also acknowledged that his party, the ANC, or some individuals within the ANC have been major role players in the activities of state capture. He has also acknowledged that the ANC and the government, to a certain extent, have let South Africans down by allowing a situation where constitutional powers were handed over to a family to be able to run the state affairs. He has also acknowledged that state capture has actually taken a lot of financial resources from the coffers of the state, which was meant for the poor in this country. He has also acknowledged that in the ANC that he serves and in the government that was an active that he served, a lot of things went wrong and very little was actually done by the ANC and the government. And of course, has also provided or made a commitment to say, having gone to the commission, there is also a commitment on the part of the government in particular to rectify the wrongs that actually took place.
All right. Theo, he didn't name anybody. He seemed to be very diplomatic with the way that he answered questions, even direct ones that could have been simply answered, but he didn't seem to do that. So the question again to you, did he do us justice? Could he have said more? I mean, he was practically an eyewitness.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I think it was a very interesting 2 days. And I think the two things that I take away from the discussion before I answer your question, the one is there's no doubt. If there was ever doubt, after these 2 days, there shouldn't be any doubt that Cyril Ramaphosa is a process man. He follows process. And sometimes, I agree with Sanusha, frustratingly so. One would expect him to move quicker on certain things, but the number of times that he answered the Chief Justice on when is he going to act, his response every time was, "I'm waiting for your report." That is process answers. But the second thing he did, which I think it's quite important, he went very close to name certain names. The name of Mashlobo was definitely mentioned. I think there was no doubt about the name of Gigaba. He even gave some praise to Fikile Mbalula. So certain names were mentioned, and I think when he ended today, I thought, okay, what we've got after today is two things. We've got a new line in the sand, if we can use his own language. And the second thing is, there's no doubt, once the report is out, and he's expecting certain proposals from Zondo, how to deal with corruption, we're going to see another round of cabinet reshuffling or people taking out or things like that, because everything pointed out that he's waiting for this report so as to do things. But my last point is, we must also expect a lot of pushback. The names was mentioned. Certain people were accused of doing certain things, especially in the intelligence world and so on. And I can already hear the Twitter handles going off their handles and the guys threatening with court action. There will definitely be pushback following today.
So, Nusha, one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea that the ANC looks after its own and that's where their loyalty is first before state and government. And in his testimony, it sounded as if he wanted to say a lot more but couldn't because of his position within the party and perhaps as president.
Yeah, it's very likely that you get that impression. And I think, to add to what Theo was saying, for me, he's very procedural and he likes processes. So I think at the same time, he's also very much a loyalist member of the ANC. You may not agree with what the kind of ANC he's currently overseeing, but he's a loyalist to the ANC in terms of the fact that it's the party that he represents and it's the party that he has to represent in the way that he feels fit to do so. And I think, that in a sense is where I found that in the last 2 days, specifically, I think when he was trying to build that narrative of what the next steps will be, as much as he's waiting for the report to be finalized and submitted to him, but also talking about the reforms that he's going to undertake in terms of the state administration and the questions around the reforms and how to deal with state capture and the kind of institutional architecture that he's putting into place. It doesn't necessarily synchronize with the fact that the other end of the spectrum is the party. And the party processes and structures need to align, because this is where a lot of the issues tend to hit the road in terms of the deployment committee issues and challenges that were raised yesterday, the issue of cadre deployment as well, the questions around people who are sitting in different spaces in the ministries, his overall bureaucracy. And we didn't even touch on the fact that today he actually mentioned why he did the reshuffle around the State Security Agency, but that's also very critical. So I think this kind of idea that state capture only kind of remains within the state architecture, it also means you've got to start thinking about how this administration you're trying to reform and saying never again will we have this kind of state capture also goes back to the party, because the party is doing business with the state.
Levy, a difficult question for him was that about the appointments of Mashlobo and Fraser. Do you think that he dealt with that adequately, or are citizens left with a proper explanation of why people who seem to be implicated have been hired by him?
Well, Peter, I think firstly one must acknowledge that the position of the president becomes a bit complicated in situations like this one. Maybe let's just quickly go back to the ANC conference in Nasrec, where there was a contestation in Nasrec, and then the delegates of the ANC Nasrec said, this National Executive Committee of the ANC must build unity within the ANC. And that is what the leadership of the ANC, led by Ramaphosa, had to try to do. And that puts him in a very difficult situation in the sense that when he has to make his appointments, He is not supposed to make appointments only in favor of those people who have been seen to be supportive of him. He also has to appoint people from another faction in the interest of unity. And whether we like it or not, Peter, the president of the ANC, like a leader of any other political party, when it comes to decision-making, government decision-making, that person will consider those that are coming from his or her party and to a certain extent consult with the members of the party. Because in any way, these people are deployed by the party to government. Now, there seems to be a basket, and this basket is only meant for people that are supposed to be appointed as ministers. Hence, we see cabinet reshufflement, which will always see same people being moved around from one portfolio to the other. And that creates a very serious problem to all of us. But I think for the ordinary citizen, the expectation would have been that if indeed the president knew that one person in the name of David Mahlobo is compromised in terms of himself, his behavior, and what has actually done in the past, ordinary people would have expected Ramaphosa not to appoint that person in his cabinet. Whether that will actually trigger some tensions within the party, that is a matter that, as a leader, he would have been able to explain to his party. But I think appointing Mahlobo and some other individuals within his cabinet, it's one area that I think the president might have actually erred. He might have been pressurized by members of his party, or he strategically appointed certain people so that when reports comes out or information comes out to the public, he would have sufficient justification to expel them from cabinet. So he has to create a balance. And that is the difficulty that I think the president finds himself facing at the current moment.
Theo, similar question, I guess, following on these appointments. David Mahlobo, we've just heard from Levy, but there's Ayanda Dlodlo as well, who I suppose was punished for her time at State Security, but then she's moved to public service, and that's not a small job. And the public service, the employees are probably wondering, why is she being brought to us if she hasn't excelled in another ministry? How does the president explain that?
Peter, there's an interesting saying in politics, and that is, keep your enemies, or keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And very often, if you take what Levy just said, if you look at the matrix that the cabinet really is, a matrix of interests within the party, sometimes it's better to keep somebody closer and to keep them busy than to kick them out and to allow them time to mobilize in other spheres. But I think also the hard work in the portfolio that she has now inherited was done by Senzo Nchunu before her. For her now, it's the implementation of the decision of a very small rise in pay for the civil servants, and to oversee some of the interventions that the president mentioned. A school, a government school, and the capacitation of people in government. Because that, I think, if one were to look today at all the things he mentioned, he was forward-looking in terms of what we can do to change things around. And we know from Nasrec until now, it's about 4 years, it took a huge amount of time and effort to get where we are. And we're still not through the problem. So there's a lot of things that's going to happen, and you have to look also at what's going on with the RET guys on the side, what's going to happen to former President Zuma, his illness, the jail, and so on and so on. What is going to happen to Ace Magashule? Because that whole area in that part of the party is sitting very uncomfortably where they are sitting. And then the next thing that we have to look at, and this is a little bit in the future, we also have to look at December next year, 2022, when the next leadership election in terms of ANC National Conference procedures are going to take place. So the president must act now, but he also looks far ahead in terms of where he must go and what he must do.
Sanusha, do you agree that in part the way he answered questions today was partly informed by his ambitions going forward still?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got a plan. That's what came out in the closing remarks. He's got a plan. This is his narrative. This is his framework. He spoke about it in a very authoritative way. He was clear, coherent, concise. And I think that's his ambition, that he wants to get it right. I mean, you know, we heard about the reforming of the state's institutions, strengthening state institutions. We heard about reforming of the public procurement processes. We talked about the professionalization of the public service. The National School of Government is there, but it's about getting it further and deepening the skill set of the bureaucracy in order to serve people and serve the nation. And it was really about what is the role of people who go into the civil service, but to be that civil service to be effective. So he's got a real plan. He also spoke about some of the implementation of things that happened in the last couple of years, you know, since he's become president. He talked about the MPA and upgrading the way in which they've done their work. And we've seen, you know, the Hawks, etc. But there's also been tensions, you know, between some of these institutions. There's been a pullback. It's not just only about, you know, the fact that there is a watching brief or keeping an eye on what's happening in terms of what the processes are and what's coming down the line in the party, apart from the fact that we also have an NGC that needs to happen before the National Elective Conference, and that also needs to take place somewhere in all of this. But it's also keeping an eye on what's happening in your bureaucracy at the local government levels. You know, you have the BMG processes. You've got to look at the provincial. You've got to know whether there's going to be an election this year or not in terms of local government, how that's going to play out in terms of the architecture that we are talking about. So there's a whole lot of pulse points that actually sit in this entire context of the political body of the state that links up to the party. And I think, you know, for him, it's about going forward. But going forward also means that he has to deal with a bureaucracy that may not always be loyal to him, a bureaucracy that may actually have different types of interpretations of power and how they want to structure that power. I mean, you just got to take one province. You know, the challenges in Northwest, for example. What's going on there is quite interesting in terms of the architecture of local government. We don't have to talk about KZN because I think we've over-explained KZN, but it's still a problem. It's still a challenge. And then, of course, there's Gauteng. Then, of course, there's other provinces as well, Eastern Cape, etc., where he has to think about how this is going to roll out, not necessarily only at the national level, but roll out at the provincial level. And I think he hinted at this or mentioned it as one of the initiatives, which is the district development model, in order to bring these things together. But he has to get the support of his party, and he's got to get the support of the bureaucracy. And if he has to clean house, he has to do it in a way that basically doesn't create a challenge for him when he goes into these other avenues of governance in the party and governance in the state.
All right, so Levi, we're going to start wrapping up this part of the conversation, but just to follow on with what Sanusha is saying, do you think that, and I'm just going to put on my devil's advocate hat on for a couple of seconds, do you think that the Mahlobos of this world are there to help him get provinces like Mpumalanga, for example, and that if one is to be quite cynical, that the timing of the report might be interesting given this November next year date?
Well, I think the most interesting part, Peter, is that Ramaphosa is, as Sarush has actually indicated, is a person who is looking forward. And I think in his presentation, he tried his best to be seen as a very neutral person within the party and as a leader of the state. He did not want to be seen to be on the side of another faction or on the other side. But what Ramaphosa is to do now is to behave in a manner that everybody else that looks at him would say, here is a leader of the party, here is the leader of the state, who is actually focusing on the future, who has tried his best to accommodate all factions and work or try to work with all these people. And if you look at those that seem to be falling within the party, Ramaphosa would try his best to allow the processes of the ANC to unfold, and everybody else will end up saying, this is what the party has actually said that is being led by Ramaphosa. And in doing so, I think, he would actually be portraying a posture that says, I'm doing my best to implement the resolution of Nasrec of bringing everybody together and ensuring that at the end of the day, there is unity within the party. And in doing so, he is able to have those that are opposed to unity to be easily exposed and be seen by everybody, even outside the ANC.
All right, so we're going to come back to the president and what he said and some of the issues that came up. But as I said, the Watchdog is about bringing people, leaders and institutions to account. And I want us to bring to account now the Commission of Inquiry itself. And let's just take a look at this clip. The president had been asked a question, and it was a pretty serious one. And this is the kind of atmosphere, I think, that we've seen in the last couple of days.
Mr. Chairperson, I'm waiting for the Commission's report in this regard to be able to make my judgment.
Well, certainly we'll come back to the Commission because it's a central part of your explanation for the events and your own relation to those events over the past 10 years.
All right, so we're going to take a break, and then after that, the question I'm going to be putting to my panel is, did the Commission of Inquiry treat the president with kid gloves? Did it equip itself? Has it been fair in how it's treated its witnesses and led evidence? We'll explore that on The Watchdog right after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Watchdog, and we're bringing into sharp focus the President's testimony today at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. And just before the break, I played you a little clip, and there was a jovial mood and atmosphere at the best of times during the past 2 days. And some people might interpret this as the Commission of Inquiry being soft on the president and treating him with kid gloves. Well, let's find out from our panel if the Commission of Inquiry itself equipped itself properly in dealing with the president. Thea?
Yeah, well, I think we must also acknowledge that the personality of the Deputy Chief Justice, or now the Acting Chief Justice, he's got a very friendly manner, and I think these kind of jokes or friendliness that he portrayed with the president. I can also recall several other interviews that he had where there was bantering and laughter and so on and so on. That's his personality. If I look critically at the Zondo Commission, I would say three things. The first thing is the commission bought definitely into the narrative what Mr. Popo Molefe gave earlier on, and that was portrayed yesterday. I think the commission bought into what the president said. So in that sense, there's a positive communication there. But what bothers me about the commission is an overrepresented group of, I would say, jurists, legal fraternity, judges, and so on and so on. And I think some of them lacked, in my view, the intricate understanding of political dynamics, of sometimes how wheels within wheels worked in politics. That some of the questions definitely indicated to me that how power relationships within the ANC and the relationship between the ANC and the government or the state, there I found the commission not always on the sharpest side of the stick.
Sanusha, how well did the Commission of Inquiry do? We have a former president who says that it was biased and it was quite accusatory with certain witnesses and led evidence with kid gloves with others. What's your take?
Yeah, I think, the tone was set by the acting Chief Justice and the way that he managed the entire process itself. The relationship he had with both the evidence leaders, but also the relationship he had with people that were giving testimony, those that were actually appearing before the commission. You actually saw somebody who was very patient. I think for me, he was patient in all of this, patient with evidence leaders, patient with witnesses, patient with people who kind of snubbed their nose at the commission at times and used all kinds of shenanigans to not answer questions. It was very rarely you saw the Chief Justice, acting Chief Justice, get completely frazzled and decide, he's going to set his authority. If he did it in a very gentle but in a very authoritative way. He didn't come across as arrogant, which I think was really good for this kind of inquisitorial kind of approach to this commission, because that's what it is. It was a kind of inquest into understanding the dynamics of state capture. And I think at times, when you think about what the former president, Jacob Zuma, says about this commission, I think the problem there is whether or not it is a subjective interpretation of the fact that the commission was doing something that didn't really sit very well with the former president, but also with others who felt that they didn't need to account. And that was the bigger question in the room, as opposed to whether this was a biased institution or a biased commission. I think on the basis of to what extent did the evidence leaders understand the intricacies, etc., I think there is a point to understand that, the way the power dynamics work is important. But again, I think their role was to join the dots, to get to the very basic of how did this come together? Where was the networks? How did the networks come together? And perhaps this is something in the report itself, as it's been written, will be addressed in terms of the intricacies of power in politics and who's who and who knows who and how do these networks operate, which is something I think needs to be dealt with in the final report, because then we get a sense of this very, very disturbing set of issues that not is peculiar to South Africa. I don't think South Africa is an exception to these kinds of networks and how they operate, but it's definitely an understanding of why, for example, we need legislation like the Political Party Funding Act, and I think much more than that, to understand whether political parties and individuals in political parties can do business with the state, because of this kind of question about how does undue influence work.
Levy, could the Commission of Inquiry have been a bit more direct and pressing with the president? Did they treat the former president the same way they treated the current president?
Well, Peter, I think one is to look at the purpose of the commission. The purpose of the commission is to establish whether there were wrongdoings within the state and all the matters related to that. Hence, we had state capture. And I was listening to the questions that were being posed to the president. And these are the same questions that were posed to all other members or individuals who were invited to go to the commission. But I think what might have stood out for me is that I think it's very important to be able to read the environment and create a situation where, as a person who is appearing before the commission, you create your own comfort. Some people who were called at the commission, you could see how uncomfortable they were. You could see how they wanted the entire process to quickly come to an end because of a number of other reasons, which unfortunately we did not see with President Ramaphosa. The moment former President Zuma appeared at the commission, I saw a person who was very much relaxed and comfortable whilst was explaining a number of issues in a session that actually took almost 2 days. And that is exactly what is expected from all the people that are supposed to go and answer questions at the commission. We or most people have not been called to go and sit at the commission, and you don't know what goes in the minds of a lot of people that are going there to be questioned. But generally, I think the evidence leaders have actually done their best, because I don't think there are questions that they felt that we need to withdraw this question because now this is President Ramaphosa, or we just have to ask him specific questions. Because if they had done that, they would actually not provided the best service that we expected as ordinary citizens from the Commission.
Yeah, I mean, Theo, the chairperson tried his level best, and I think at some times he bent over backwards to try and create the impression that you are safe sitting in this chair, please testify, and trying to make the witnesses as comfortable as possible. At the end of this story, there will be people who will just say it was all rubbish because they've taken a position already. But do you think that they've done enough for the public to feel confident that a just report will come out?
I think the test of the report will be not only in the story that they're going to put together, and it will be volumes and volumes of work, but the main report, I think that is what most of us will read, but also what they are going to propose in terms of anti-corruption measures, of different things which they picked up. That, I think, will be the value of this report. Yes, there will be people that will absolutely rubbish this report, and we can actually name them already, because they were some of the guys with the most tenuous relationship with the Commission, which had to be dragged there and those kind of things. So that we can expect. But I think South Africans in general, the listeners tonight, must apply their minds in terms of reading what is going on and what's not going on, and not to fall victim of an alternative narrative, which we can already see emerging in some sectors. I think the integrity of the judge, the integrity of the Commission, in my view, stands out. And what we and normal people don't see, hundreds of people were actually working behind the scenes. People in different fields, people doing all kinds of investigations and doing the tracking of accounts and things like that. So by the time the Commission posed questions to people in front of them, they actually had a very good idea of what's going on behind the scenes. And the Commission was actually just checking what their version of the story is. And I think the judge said that several times when he posed questions, especially in cases where people were involved either in state-owned enterprises or some of the things that went wrong. You will recall that he often said, "Give me your version of the story." And whenever he said that, I'm sure he had behind him already a lot of information of what actually happened, especially if you follow the money and if you were looking who paid whom, when and how much. And I think those information the Commission had much of.
And Sanusha, I guess one of the dangers of having a commission like this and in public is that the public think that what we saw on television or heard on radio is the whole story. There are many, many affidavits that we will not see until the final report that didn't require the people that deposited those affidavits to appear before the Commission, but however put some important evidence on the table. So I guess at the end of the day, just based on what we did see and what we did hear, not knowing what else was presented, do you think that a case has been made that state capture happened in this country?
I can't see how you could not take that opinion or take that view, considering what evidence we did have privy to in terms of what was in the public domain, based on the fact that the Commission was televised, there were reports, there were media allowed to basically provide a visual and an insight into the proceedings. So I can't imagine anybody saying, well, did state capture really happen? I think you'll have to be really, really a hesitant individual to say that, to ask that question, because just given the fact that I think at times what I found interesting was, the way in which the commission itself organized its operations, the way it organized the testimony, the way it went about trying to get to the kind of substantive issues around state capture, also made people like myself ask the question again, how do I connect the dots? How do I actually think about this? It may not be necessarily the broader South African public that does this, but I think we can't necessarily ignore the fact that the broader South African public has now an understanding of the fact that state capture did happen. And we may not understand the intricacies of it, because I think the commission has only managed to capture and mind the pun, capture the tip of the iceberg of what was happening. But I think at the end of the day, we now have an understanding that these things were there, it was happening, that the stakeholders and the actors that were involved in all of this were not just individuals that were sitting at different places in different spaces, but they were kind of a network of individuals, patronage networks, networks around how they actually moved and what was happening. And I think at the end of the day, we have to recognize that even though the price tag of this commission was rather high, and we need value for money, and we need that report to be in whatever form it comes out in, and what recommendations it makes around interventions and policy and going forward, those need to be actionable and be operationalized. We have to understand that it did give us a kind of roadmap of what was happening around state capture. And I think what is important as well is that whilst there's a lot of testimony that may not come into the public domain, there's also a lot of testimony that has not been heard by the commission. And I think, again, we have to try and make sure that whatever happens going forward now, in terms of what the president has said, he's waiting for the report, we have to make sure that, if the president doesn't want this to happen again, remember, he's also got to make sure that he gets the kind of right structures in place, the right policies in place, but it's also about governance stability. And I think for me, what is also very, very critical here is when we get to 2022, and when we think about this next elective conference, and we think about whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be the next, have a second term as ANC president, and then perhaps even as the president of the Republic, who comes after him for continuity? Because the problem here is that it's 5-year terms. And there needs to be continuity, and there needs to be a long haul if we are to basically make sure we don't go back to where we were 9 years ago or even 5 years ago. And I think the challenge right now is that we've got to also ask the question of who's going to make sure that whatever's put into place now doesn't get undone after 2024.
All right, so
particularly in that space.
Levy, the last question on the performance of the Commission of Inquiry. We know for sure that many more people could have come forward if state capture was as widespread as we think that it might have been. Do you think that the Commission could have subpoenaed more people who were in key positions where some of these activities must have happened whilst they were there?
Yes, indeed, Peter. Remember that there is an acknowledgement on the part of the Commission to say that if we had sufficient time, we would have actually called more other people to come in. But I think in the interest of South Africa, we have had sufficient information that is able to tell us that there are certain things that were happening in South Africa. And also at the same time, we have a commitment on the part of government or on the part of the leaders of government who are saying that we are awaiting for the report. We acknowledge the challenges or the problems that actually happened, but we have got a program to fix all these issues. And I think if you also look at the manner in which the commission was organized, just to expose certain things that were actually happening behind closed doors. for me, they've done enough. There might have been a lot of other issues that were happening that the commission has not been able to unearth. For an example, the president was also saying that maybe the commission should also go and look at the corruption that is actually taking place in the private sector. It also it takes us to one point and one point only, that we have got a challenge of corruption in South Africa, and we need bold leadership to stand up and ensure that we fight against corruption. And as Sarusha has indicated, 2022 becomes quite crucial in terms of who then has to take over the leadership of the ANC, who must then ensure that the project of fighting against corruption continues and it does not die.
All right, okay. I think let's start wrapping up this conversation as we go back to the president. And over the last 2 days, one of the issues that keeps coming up and was being raised was what he could have done once he found out about the state capture activities that might have been taking place. He said he found out in the media about some of the things, and again, some people might find that hard to believe, and some people believe that it was about him just trying to keep his job. This is what he said about that.
It was not so much that one wanted to hold on to this position at all costs. No, I mean, even being in that position, a person like me was a great sacrifice, because one's life would have been a lot easier and much more pleasant. But it was to stay in, to bring about the change that we are leading and proceeding forward with now.
So, Theo, do you think the president genuinely had his heart in the right place? The decisions that he made to stay on and start this process that we're seeing now, or was it about becoming a second-term president?
Shortly after he left politics in 1996, he spoke to some people that I know, and he said the one thing that he misses now that he's in the private sector is the vibrancy of politics. So I think he had a long time wanting to come back to politics, and now, of course, he ended up being the president. And remember, this commission was not a commission on corruption, and I want to add to what Levy said, it was a commission on state capture, which is a word that we borrowed from the World Bank, which they coined the phrase in the Eastern Bloc, where the oligarchs took over governments after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of Russia and the Soviet Union and so on. So he was placed very strategically. Personally, I think he knew more. Personally, I think he knew earlier on. But now, remember what I said earlier on about how the Commission deconstructed what happened. What was really going on here was that in his position as deputy president, and the deputy president in South Africa is not a secure position. The deputy president I would compare to a senior cabinet minister, unlike the American system where the deputy president is an elected official in his own right. I think he had to play a very, very tactical and strategic game, staying in there. And by his own admission, he kind of acted twice in this whole process. But I think he knew all along, and it was a game to stay in the running so as to change things, which then started by 2018 and where we are now, 3 years later.
Sanusha, does the ends justify the means? Do you think that he was sincere, or was he playing political games, A, for politics and his own survival, but also perhaps altruistically to really genuinely save the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult one, because we're not there. We don't know what these positions mean. And I think the challenge is really, how he characterized the five options and what the five options meant. And the fact that in the insert you played, he said it would have been easy for me to have gone and led a much quieter life. But he stuck to the course. And my sense, I think, in thinking about it and trying to understand it from my perspective is the what if indeed he decided to resign, what would have happened at Nasrec? What would have happened post Nasrec? Where would we be right now? Would it have been much more than what we have anticipated? Would we have had the Zondo Commission actually completing its term in terms of its mandate? So I think at the end of the day, the question is really what the evidence leader Pretorius had asked. It was about staying, but also in what context and how to think about it. And I think the point that Theo makes about the relationship between the presidency and the deputy presidency office is very interesting, because at the end of the day, if you look at what David Mabuza is doing in that presidency as a deputy presidency, it's not necessarily in that kind of capacity where the shifts and balances happen. Yes, we understand how that played out after Nasrec and what were the tones that were coming out and how that had needed to align. But at the end of the day, I think, again, the question in my mind is what was officially known and what was unofficially known, and what was officially known, could that be acted upon, and did the deputy president's office have that authority to do so? But if indeed he was going to, and I think it links up to the point, just the last point, it links up to the last point was made, was who would have fired you? Was the interesting question that was asked.
Okay, Levi, I just want to play this clip quickly because I'm going to give the last question to you, and then you're going to have to give me a very brief answer. But it was this whole issue, of course, of creating a super presidency. And this is an allegation that the president has denied by bringing the State Security Agency into his office.
Precisely part of the reason that motivated me to bring the SSA into the presidency so that we can go much more intensively to the depth of this. So, Mr. Pretorius, it is something that is firmly on my radar screen, including the account and the report of those people who were employed, who were given arms, and some of them automatic, arms that have never been accounted for, brought back, and the activities of those people that you were talking about. So it is part of an intensive investigative process that is underway that will unravel precisely quite a number of the issues that you have covered.
All right, so Levi, in 30 seconds, do you have faith in what the president is saying, that post this commission that we will cut corruption, we will deal with all these issues, and that government will function as it should? 30 seconds.
Well, Peter, I think with a positive spirit and with the commitment that we've seen from the president, I think we might be moving towards the right direction. If we support him and he has the strong team to run South Africa, I think South Africa is moving in the right direction.
All right. Lady and gentlemen, I wish we could have spoken for a bit longer. This is the kind of thing probably needs 2.5 hours to discuss. But Theo Venter, Anusha Naidu, Levi Ndou, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts, your insights. Greatly appreciated on the program tonight.
Cheers. Thank you.
And that's where we come to the end of tonight's edition of The Watchdog. Thanks very much indeed for tuning in. Please join us again tomorrow evening at the same time as we bring to account somebody else, leaders, institutions that are functioning on your behalf. Good night, and the Globe's coming up shortly. Stay with us for that.